Dragon Quest Monsters has always been a series which has never got the attention it deserves. Even though it may not be as popular, the Dragon Quest monster games pack a serious amount of originality and manage to stand out amongst the various copycats by providing its own unique take on the formula so many players enjoy. Anyone who's played a Dragon Quest RPG will instantly be familiar with the gameplay that basically sees you travelling the world to advance the story and fighting monsters in between. The battles are delivered in a turn-based fashion and take place in a first-person view that allows each of the enemy sprites to be appreciated, and there's an absolute bucket load to encounter, from the small-time grunts like slimes to some of the more impressive enemies like bosses that provide a real challenge to overcome. Now, one of the main differences between this and past games is that it sees you being in charge of a whole campsite of people, which manages to serve as a sort of hub area where you're able to buy and sell items and weapons, as well as check in on the various NPCs that have joined your cause. While travelling around the world, you take along your caravan, which contains both your monsters as well as human allies, which assist in battle in many different ways. Even with just the human allies, you can organise and customise your party with a lot of options, and this is where half of the fun lies. Tinkering with your setup and producing the best possible team is half the battle, and with the amount of variety on offer, it's something you can spend hours on end perfecting. So if you're a long-time Dragon Quest fan or are simply someone looking to try out something new, then Monsters Caravan Heart is a game that won't let you down. Monstergate is a game that never left Japan and shares a lot in common with the likes of Shiren the Wanderer, and is essentially a roguelike RPG that lets you choose a character and class to take on various missions within dungeons and over time slowly improve your effectiveness through different stats. Like many of its kind, there's a huge focus on acquiring new items, but in a bit of a twist. Here in Monstergate, it sees you having to collect cards that offer up different abilities and weapons, from spears to swords and magic, and you can only carry a limited amount with you at any given time to be used in the dungeon, with any that you don't use being saved for future runs. This also plays into the economy in the game, with shops selling these cards as well, allowing you to stock up before heading out to complete a dungeon, as well as dedicated casinos that give you the opportunity to bet your gold to receive some of the more rare cards that you'll likely not find out in the wild. Now, one of the best things about Monstergate though is just how much there is to do, and after you've completed the huge amount of dungeons, you then move on to castles dotted around the world map that add a serious amount of longevity to the game. When it comes to these dungeons, they're all procedurally generated, and as you would guess, there's plenty of enemies that occupy them as well. As you defeat them, you'll slowly level up, but once you leave and come back to another dungeon, it's completely reset, and you'll have to build up your character again. When it comes down to it, Monstergate ends up being an incredibly enjoyable RPG to have on the GBA, and even though its translation is only partial, it's easy to follow, with all of the menus and important aspects you'll need to play being in English. So if you're looking for your next retro gem to take with you on the go, Monstergate shouldn't be missed. Bomberman Tournament is a completely different take on what you would usually expect when it comes to the franchise, and harkens back to the Game Boy Color game, with it presenting a huge adventure to undertake. As with many RPGs, it's got a great story to tell, which picks up with the entire planet being in danger after 5 meteors hit the surface, each of them carrying 5 different bombers that have constructed a huge frozen fortress from where to carry out their evil plans. After a failed attempt to bring them down, Bomberman is called in to not only rescue his ally, but to ultimately put an end to the mayhem. Now, the gameplay is very much what you would expect from the series, and still sees you having to use bombs by placing them on the ground, usually to tackle enemies or figure out puzzles, but exploring is one of its main draws as well. There's a wealth of different locations throughout the game, from cozy towns that the often helpful NPCs call home, to forests, caves and snowy peaks that add a lot of variety to the game. The most interesting addition though is the concept of Caraban, small Pokemon-like creatures that grant you a range of different powers to help defeat enemies and traverse the game's world. There's 25 of them in total, and they grant you the ability to do several things, such as kick or throw bombs further, swim in water, fly over gaps, or boost your speed in general, so it's a good idea to locate as many of them as you can. A nice inclusion, especially for fans of Bomberman though, is an entirely different mode, separate from the story, which allows you to battle with up to 4 other players across 8 different arenas that helps increase the game's replayability. Bomberman Tournament ends up being a perfect example of how to mix various genres into a great adventure, and all the while retaining the core of what Bomberman's gameplay has always been about. When it came to RPGs, the Game Boy Advance was one of the best handhelds to own, with the likes of Riviera and Golden Sun being huge successes, but one that never got its chance to head west was Magical Vacation. The narrative begins with a group of friends from a magical school taking a vacation during the summer. On one of their adventures, they stumble upon a cave that just so happens to be inhabited by monsters known as Enigmas, and half of the group end up being transported to another world as a result. It's then up to you and one of your remaining friends to set out to find them, and understand why these monsters have begun to appear throughout the kingdom and ultimately take them down. When it comes to the gameplay, the battle system seems pretty basic at first and sees you having up to 6 party members to contend with at any one time. You've got the standard magic, defend and item options, but what helps set the combat apart from other games on the system is the inclusion of spirits known as Serai. These are little creatures that can be found throughout your travels and have an affinity with a certain element. They can be summoned during battle, and depending on if one of your party members matches this specific type of element, they can provide up to 4 times the amount of damage that your attacks would usually do. Known as spirit combos, the strategic aspect of the combat adds a nice amount of depth to even the most trivial of encounters throughout the game, and really comes into play during the several much more challenging boss fights that await you. Now, there's no way I could talk about Magical Vacation without mentioning the visuals. To be blunt, they are simply beautiful, and the entire adventure ends up feeling like a lush and vivid painting come to life as you make your way through it. On the whole, Magical Vacation is a great example of one of the finest RPGs on the Game Boy Advance that never left Japan. So if you fancy jumping into a charming adventure you can take with you on the go, Magical Vacation will not disappoint. Coming from the same mind behind the Metal Gear series, Zone of the Enders began its life on the PlayStation 2 and would go on to produce a sequel and a spin-off for the GBA. Unlike the main games though, Fist of Mars was a tactical RPG and left behind the real-time action for a more strategic approach. In terms of story, it follows a young man known as Cage, who finds himself ending up on Mars after an accident on his ship surrounding the planet, and is soon saved by a group known as the BIS, who ask him to join their forces and counteract a growing threat on the planet. It ends up being a pretty decent narrative to follow, and pushes the action forward at a good pace that escalates with each and every turn it takes. But where Fist of Mars truly shines is on the battlefield. Anyone familiar with SRPGs will feel right at home, with the combat taking place on a grid where you've got several units under your command. They've all got different abilities for you to take advantage of, from those who can move more amount of spaces to units that specialise in long range attacks, ensuring that there's plenty of strategy involved in each battle. What takes it to the next level though, and adds a lot to each move you make, is that once you select your target, you're thrown into a first person view where you've got to aim and hit the target that can result in different outcomes, such as landing critical hits or missing completely. And as you take each enemy down, you'll receive a small amount of XP as well as money, which can be used to beef up your unit stats and unlock a range of upgrades that can be equipped to improve each mech's effectiveness on the field. For fans of tactical RPGs, this is one game to definitely give a try, and if you're at all fond of Zone of the Enders as a whole, then this will end up being an essential game to own on the GBA. Coming from Tecmo, Monster Rancher Advance 2 is the sequel to the often overlooked RPG that began its life on the PlayStation and went on to receive a few sequels and spin-offs, which took the concept of raising and fighting monsters even further. With Advance 2, you take on the role of a young breeder living on an island who's become well known for his talents, and is soon paired with an assistant to take his breeding skills to the next level. The world itself is your typical anime fare, with plenty of quirky characters to meet along the way that actually contribute to the immersiveness of the game and the story that it has to tell. By far the most engaging part of the game are the monsters themselves, and even though they don't possess the same sort of inspired designs from the likes of Pokemon, they still offer up plenty of personality and charm to keep them all entertaining. Now the main hook is that you've got to raise and train each of them over the course of the game, may that be feeding them or training with them to help increase their stats, and ultimately create a powerful team of monsters that can withstand the harshest treatment in battle. Of course, each monster comes along with their own pros and cons, as well as a selection of moves to pull off that are either weak or effective against different types of enemies. Of course, each monster comes along with their own pros and cons, as well as a selection of moves to pull off that are either weak or effective against different types of enemies that you'll come up against. Overall, if you're fond of monster raising games like Pokemon and Digimon, then Monster Rancher is definitely for you. Just don't go into it expecting the same sort of attention to detail that you'll find in the games just like it. Demi-Kids is a spin-off of the popular SMT series, known as Devil Children in Japan, and is a more child-friendly approach that keeps the focus on demon summoning and ends up being one of the better, albeit lesser-known RPGs on the GBA. Like Pokemon, the game comes in different variants, known as Light and Dark, with both of them following different characters who each have their own stories to tell. Light follows Jin, whereas Dark follows Akira, who end up realizing they're devil children who were both half human and half demon, with their intertwined stories clocking in at about 20 to 30 hours each. Now for anyone who's played the Shin Megami Tensei games before, the gameplay will feel instantly familiar, with it blending exploring the huge world and first-person turn-based battles with collecting and fusing demons to build a formidable team. The battles themselves are the real highlight, with each of your party members being able to utilize these demons and their abilities to take on the enemy by exploiting various weaknesses that often grant you critical hits. A nice touch is how you're able to swap your demon and summon a new one mid-fight, which really helps mix up the strategy involved in each battle. One area where the game excels has to be the visuals, and the sprite work that's on display is truly impressive, with each of the demons and characters coming along with plenty of personality, and with nearly 370 demons to collect across both versions, there's plenty to see and do. All in all, Demi-Kids is easily one of the best spin-offs in the franchise, and even though its childish appearance and tone may lead you to think it's not as well thought out or as in-depth as the proper SMT games, once you play it, that all slowly fades away. Zoid's Legacy is a turn-based RPG that's all based around mechanical toy robots, with the player taking up the role of a pilot known as Zero, who finds himself waking up in a strange new world where these robotic creatures known as Zoids are used to take place in tournaments that pit them against each other. It presents a huge world to explore that's made up of various villages, with the main goal being to collect as many Zoids as you can. Now instead of how it's done in Pokemon, you won't be capturing them, but rather building them from parts which are left over from defeated robots. Placed in each town are labs where you're free to build new Zoids, repair your team, or even upgrade your existing robots, which ends up being one of the more interesting and rewarding aspects of the game. Now for the battles themselves, it's a turn-based system, with each of your robots having a wealth of options when it comes to both attacking or defending against the enemy, from using their claws, fangs and tails, to the options of weapons such as machine guns or cannons mounted onto their bodies that pack a real punch. Each of the fights can be made up of 12 different robots, with 6 on each side, and the formation of them is also a factor to take into consideration, as depending on their placement it determines what type of weapons they're allowed to use. It manages to bring a fair bit of tactics to each fight, for example having your larger robots in the front to shield against attacks, to being able to avoid incoming hits more easily for those in the back. As with Pokemon, there's also focus on elemental differences that will help you get the upper hand, with the various types of robots being either effective or weak against each other. Overall, Zoid's Legacy ends up being a pretty well thought out RPG, and for anyone who's at all into monster collecting games like Pokemon, there's a lot it has to offer, so if you can find a physical copy or download it on the emulator, it's definitely worth doing so. Developed by Alpha Dream, the same guys behind the Mario and Luigi RPG series, Tomato Adventure centers around 2 kids known as Demille and his girlfriend Parasan, who live in the lush and vibrant world of the Ketchup Kingdom. Cast out of society for not liking the taste of tomatoes, they roam the slums, and it's not long before everything goes wrong with Parasan being kidnapped. This sets up the adventure and sees you visiting a variety of imaginative locations that are filled with NPCs that are each afforded a ton of personality through the game's awesome script. For as charming as the story is though, it's the gameplay that Tomato Adventure presents that truly steals the show. Combat is the main area where this rings true, with each of your characters throwing out their gadgets once they encounter an enemy. These gadgets, known as gimmicks in the game, serve as the weapons you'll be using throughout the journey, and there's a generous amount of them included, which all offer up unique mechanics when it comes to taking on your foes. It requires the player to use the face buttons and various combinations in order to carry out any given move you wish to land. It's a really intriguing and more importantly engaging system that breathes a real amount of depth into the turn-based combat. But going one step further is the ore system that rewards you with a certain number of points for successful hits. Once you've built up enough, you'll be able to unleash a devastating attack that usually wipes the floor with standard enemies. However, if at any time you don't successfully complete an attack, all of your ore points will be lost and you'll have to start over from scratch. This will constantly push you to carry out each attack with care, and as a result you're rewarded for your hard work. Ultimately, this is another great game that the West would not have got the chance to play if it wasn't for independent translators. And don't let the rather childish exterior fool you, as Tomato Adventure is a game that's not afraid to challenge you. So if you're looking for a new, quirky and charming adventure to jump into, this should definitely be on your list. Although you'll constantly hear about Boktai, the third game in the series doesn't tend to get as much of a look due to it only releasing in Japan, but thanks to a fan translation, it's now easier than ever to experience it for yourself. Taking place years after the events of the second game, our hero Django finds himself sealed in a prison by Sabata, who's hell-bent on releasing an evil beast of destruction with the intent of taking its power for himself. As with most action RPGs, you'll be picking up loot, equipping various weapons and pieces of armor, as well as increasing your stats, which are made up of vitality, spirit and strength, and all have their role to play throughout the adventure. Of course, the main selling point of the series is once again in full swing, and requires you to play outside in order to charge your weapon with sunlight. But that's not the only thing it can do, as it can also be used to dry up water that might be blocking the way forward, to building solar bridges to help make it across large gaps. In the various dungeons that make up the game, you'll be sneaking around, taking out enemies and figuring out a range of different puzzles that don't feel tacked on, but rather a natural part of the game and require some serious thinking to get through. It's this sense of challenge that really helps Boktai 3 excel, and that's not even mentioning the several boss fights that litter the game, which are quite easily its best feature. Each of them are meticulously designed, both visually and mechanically, and require the player to get used to their unique movements and attacks in order to take them down. If you've never got into the series, the third game by far offers up the best take on the formula, and is now thankfully fully available for players outside of Japan to enjoy. Well, that does it for another video. Keep an eye out for part 2, as that'll be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skillgen, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Road Rage, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.